Welcome into the Atlanta football party. I'm Jarvis Davis. Coming up on today's show, we're live in Mobile, baby. And the dogs right there shining.
This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Georgia Bulldogs football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere else, but right here at Locked On. I am your host, Tenitra Batiste, and alongside me are Jarvis Davis and Brian Gebhardt. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. The Atlanta Football Party is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, we'll talk about the week that was for the Dogs who showed out or didn't for the NFL Championship weekend. And we have a bit of a different take on the coaching carousel in college football and how losing the big dogs, no pun intended, is affecting more than just the upcoming season. But first, let's talk JD's and BG's takes on the Senior Bowl and what it means for Dogs prospects in the draft. Now, Jarvis, we know that you are our eyes on the guys in person in Mobile for the Senior Bowl. And Brian and I, of course, are following minute by minute because there's coverage all over TV, including, of course, the NFL Network. And so we've gotten a little sneak peek into it. And I kind of look at it, guys, like it's a mini combine for us and a mini pro days for us, because we know in the days and weeks to come, we're going to see a whole lot more of this for those guys who are potentially headed to the NFL. That said, Jarvis, you got to admit that once again, Georgia is represented really, really well because there are 6 players who are there in Mobile. And, my first thought was when you touched down yesterday, what was your thought on what you're looking for those guys? And then, Brian, also with you knowing about those 6 guys who are down there, what were your initial thoughts of what you want to see out of them?
I think one of the things that you have to talk about, like we were actually texting about it earlier this morning, I was just like, man, I don't see Cedric Van Pran on the roster because when I went down,
who you don't see, right?
Right. I went down to the convention center here locally in Mobile, and I was picking up my credentials and everything, and I was looking up and down the roster. That was the first name I was looking for because that was the guy that I want to see, right? Because he's the guy who's been an anchor on one of the best offensive lines in college, we've ever seen, right? As far as the seniors go. So I think that, with him, it was undisclosed. So a lot of times when that happens, more than likely it's an injury concern. Don't want to make anything worse, or it's just the agent saying, you know what, you probably don't need to be in here. You can't help or hurt yourself playing in this game. So if it can't benefit you to the positive, you might want to just hold off on playing. But this is just me speculating, though, obviously, because the reason was undisclosed. But I think just from that aspect of it, it was kind of a little disappointing. But can I just say this? Ladd won today because I've always called guys like his size like those cockroach wide receivers. You know what I'm saying? You turn the lights on, they just just getting up like that. That's what it looks like. It would look like today on one-on-ones when he was out there, and he looked fully healthy. Right? Like, when the last time we've been able to see that? This championship, Ladd didn't look like himself. When you think about those type of things of the light. So I think when you think about him being out there and getting his shine on, it was really cool to see because the dude is very precise. Yeah. He's running those routes, and those guys could not get. They couldn't stick with him. They couldn't stay with him.
And Brian, one of the tweets that I saw that kind of made me chuckle was the fact that he did indeed have a great day. And it was like, okay, literally, we're looking at a grown man among boys. Like, this dude is showing you all the wares. And then you could kind of see different beat writers from different NFL teams just salivating like, ooh, wonder if my team's going to get him and how that'll look with. And, it's like fill in the blank with that particular team's quarterback.
He just seems like he's got such a wide range of outcomes from where he's going to be drafted to what he's actually going to be in the league, because so much of it is speculation. Like, we've seen some of it at the college level. And of course he had the injury prone season that he did last year, but now there's heavy talk after today about him being a top 50 pick, maybe sliding into the back end of the first round. I didn't see that on the table before. So he must have had it. And I mean, I saw as much as I could on Twitter, but like Jarvis said, he won the day. He was the story of the day because if he's that guy, I mean, and we've seen so many good rookie wide receivers go in later rounds. I mean, the season that Puka Nacua had, of course, from a historic standpoint, a guy like Jaden Reed up there in Green Bay. It's just, you can get that value a little bit later on. So I'd be shocked personally if McConkey wound up going in the first round, but the fact that he was getting guys like that, and that was something I had my eye on going into today. What's Ladd going to do? And then what's Rosemy-Jacksaint going to do? Because he had such an interesting kind of up and down, odd career for Georgia, but was so steady. Very, very few drops, really sure hand type of individual. I know that he had a pretty good day, so I'm curious to see where he ultimately winds up going and, you know, what he winds up being long-term in the league, but not shocked at all to see a healthy Ladd McConkey do what he did today at the Senior Bowl.
And you bring up a good point with Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint too, BG. That's the type of thing that and just speaking with him, like, that's why I feel like Kirby Smart, like, deserves a lot more credit. I know he gets a lot, but this piece right here is, like, understanding, like, the importance of special teams on the next level. Like, Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint understands that because he talked about, I got a chance to talk to him after practice, and he was talking about how, hey, you know, the best players play special teams. Because a lot of times in football, I've been in locker rooms, the non-starters play special teams, like the guys that, you know, hey, barely make the team, the guys, the rah-rah guys, and they don't necessarily have enough talent to start. The goals are the guys that play on the special teams normally. But that's not the case down in Georgia, down in Athens. Like, he's putting those guys in those particular spaces because, let's just face it, let's keep it funky. Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint ain't going first round. He's probably not going second round or third round. He might be a mid to late round guy. And if you want to make that 53, and I asked him outside, like, hey, you playing special team, you help you make that squad. He's like, yeah, man, that's what it's all about, making that roster. So he understands that, and I think Kirby Smart has prepared his guys for that next level, even if they aren't those guys being talked about in the first and second and third round.
You know, it could be a Nicole Hardman, basically, and you'll find yourself with a ring, or be a Sony Michelle and find yourself with a ring. Understand your role, BG, like, understand the assignment.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about Kirby a lot with relationships with the players that he currently has, his past players, recruiting. You know, he doesn't ever burn a bridge. Not to be underestimated is the relationships he has in the league. How many coaches that he knows in the league. So he picks these guys' brains. He sends them stuff. He asks them, because they don't have to go recruiting people, so they got a little extra time to look at some other stuff. And he's asking them, hey, what is this guy? You know, what do you see this guy? I see him as this. I see him. So he gets that feedback too, and he's able to trickle that down, which to what Jarvis was just saying is so valuable for these players to be self-aware when you go in, know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and know how you can, you know, make this a 5-10 year NFL career.
And not to go off the beaten path too much, because I do want to talk about some of those other guys, and certainly we can talk about them in the deep dive as well. But there's one point that both of you guys just made, and that's sort of the preparation. And in watching the NFL Network earlier today, GM Scott Pioli and a couple of others were talking about some of those hidden gems that they're looking for. What are the things that you do in the margins? Meaning, when you're just standing next to Jarvis Davis and you don't really know who he is, because Jarvis is looking like he could be a coach, a scout, a former player, a current NFL player. You don't know. How do you interact with that person who could very well go back and give some intel to a team, right? And so a guy like Kirby Smart, having those relationships with a Scott Pioli type, or even a Jeff Ulbrich. I know we talked about him in pre-production, the Jets DC. And how do you manage through the moments when nobody's technically watching, and having those conversations with those individuals to show them who you are as a person, because your character is going to matter to a lot of teams in the NFL, and also maybe to show them a little bit of what your acumen is, and kind of throwing you some curveballs and kind of seeing how you're going to react to them. So I just absolutely love this, you guys bringing that full circle. Like, here's what the totality of the Senior Bowl means, from the practices to the informal interactions to the game itself, all teeing you up for the combine, to the pro days, and of course, ultimately to the draft. But yeah, again, we had 6 guys there. We talked about McConkey, talked about Rosemy-Jacksaint, and you know, I'm going to throw this one at you because I know they're a little pressed for time, and we'll come back and talk about the other 3. But the long snapper, like William Mote being there, it's like people don't see, he's an example of just how deep the Georgia roster is, that you're a long snapper that people are actually having conversation about heading into the Senior Bowl. It's amazing to me.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's so cool about this process, right? Because me, more than likely, I'm always gonna have my eyeballs on the offensive and defensive line. And I was talking to a guy literally fresh out of college and looking to get into some scouting, and he was a long snapper in college, and I was just like, oh man, he was telling me how his snap was like, the speed is there, because like he talking about how it has to be no more than 0.7 or 0.8 seconds to get that ball from snap to that punter's hand. It has to be no more than 0.8, 0.7 seconds. So when you think about how fast that is, so yeah, that's unless you know that this process is so deep, it's so much deeper than what people make it out to be. So yeah, it's a cool thing, and I'm not surprised, because Kirby Smart puts so much emphasis on special teams. He got starters out there playing on special teams.
Yeah.
And even Ladd McConkey understand. He was like, yeah, man, 795,000, let's go. And I'm sure there's a customer that's supposed to be in there too. So he changed it up a little bit. So yeah, it's just that stuff is just so ingrained in them. And then for them to have a long snapper there, with an opportunity to potentially go to the NFL, I'm not shocked at all.
No, and ask our guy, one of our good buddies from our old work days, Harper LaBelle, can tell you can make quite a career for yourself if you find that you are that good long snapper. So we'll talk more, because we've got some other dogs we want to get to and kind of get Jarvis's reaction and Brian's reaction on those guys. We'll talk about it when we come back in our deep dive going between the hedges. This episode of the Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by FanDuel. Now, of course, it's Happy Super Bowl, and we're going to talk about that between the hedges as well. Talk about those guys that are Georgia dogs, good damn dogs, that made an impact, or not, this weekend in the championship round of the NFL playoffs. FanDuel, they want to celebrate because it was a good weekend overall. And let's talk about America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday, which is, oh man, so quickly coming upon us, is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. So FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W, or maybe 2, or maybe 3. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. So get into it. New customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. That's pretty cool. $200 just for making a bet on which players will score a touchdown or how many points will be scored. I think that's a pretty good look. So visit FanDuel.com/locked-on today to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on today. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, guys. So a couple other guys want to get to before we talk about the NFL championship weekend that was, because we had Daijun Edwards in attendance there at Senior Bowl, also Tyke Smith and Javon Bullard. So Brian, I want to talk to you again, asking first and foremost what your initial thoughts were about them attending, and if there was anything that you saw from, like you said, whether it's Twitter, because we saw some clips on Twitter, also on the NFL Network, but any thoughts on them and their attendance at the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see what Daijun Edwards winds up being in the league, if he actually gets a chance to be like a true change of pace type of back, because he's not explosive and never really was, but he's that guy who, you give him the ball on a 3rd and short, 4th and short, and he finds a way. He's got just enough wiggle to him to get the pads moving forward and wind up doing that. And so I'm curious to see how the week plays out for him, how he winds up doing in the game later on in the week. And just what he winds up projecting to be in the league, because he really went above and beyond what people expected of him in Athens. I mean, he constantly overperformed what he came in as, which you always like to see from a player. You get to see that development. And given the injuries that various running backs had in that room the last couple of years, Daijun was just so crucial to this run and to those national championships for Georgia. So I'm excited to see what happens with his future. And it feels like we've been talking so much about the DBs for Georgia, right? Between Caleb Downs coming and going and KJ Bolden getting sniped and Malachi starting. And so the fact that, Tyke Smith and Javon Bullard are there this week too. I thought Javon Bullard was one of the more underrated players for Georgia throughout the year. He made so many big key plays, and there was so much conversation about Bowers and Beck and Ladd and, different guys coming on of late. But Bullard is going to be a guy that's going to be tough to replace. So I'm curious to see how the rest of the week goes for him as far as, the Senior Bowl goes.
Yeah. And Jarvis, I was having a conversation just this morning about DBs and how I'm going to take you guys to old Atlanta. Like, people don't dance no more. All they do is this. And so I kind of feel like that with DBs in the NFL. Like, safeties don't tackle no more. Corners don't tackle no more. All they do is this. They're just trying to strip a ball, or they're just trying to be elusive or make sure that, they're maybe defending the pass. But I always find with the likes of Dogs DBs, they're really fundamentally sound. And so when I think about a Tyke Smith or I think about a Javon Bullard, I think especially Bullard, that the term underrated could be used in an acceptable way, because I do feel like those guys are, as they always are in a Kirby Smart system, very fundamentally sound.
Yeah, and I actually talked to Javon after practice today too, and you can see just how effective the teaching kind of hit home for him when it comes to Kirby Smart, because we know Kirby Smart, that's his world. Those DBs, that's what he specializes in, and for those guys, to a guy like Javon Bullard, I'm glad that you brought him up, BG, because the guy's just a playmaker. Like, regardless of what the 40 time is, regardless of what, how fast he runs the three-cone drill, or, regardless if he gets beaten one-on-ones, which is not really all that great for safeties anyway, when you put them in those situations. So I think he's a guy to keep an eye on. He's a guy to watch out for, because the guy's just a playmaker. He talked about how his preparation was the key to that. And when you talk about, people who always find themselves around the ball, it's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence at all. That's preparation, knowing the defense, knowing what you can and can't get away with in certain coverages and everything like that. So that is deep study. It's not a coincidence that Javon Bullard found himself making big plays and big games, because he understands the gravity of the situation. And for him to shine in those moments, that is definitely a guy I would like to have on my team if I'm an NFL team.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts on Tyke Smith? Anything that you saw that stood out, or anything that you're kind of looking for in him this coming week, and maybe even in the game?
Special teams, just like Rosemy-Jacksaint, same thing. Like, special teams, get very acquainted with the special team coach. I even saw him in practice today. He was working on, rushing, in the punt period. So when you have guys like taking a liking to that, like I said, I'm not surprised, because if you're good enough to start, you're good enough to play special teams. So I think that's how he's going to make a roster. To be quite honest. So I think Tyke Smith has an opportunity. He has an opportunity. The more and more you take a liking to that, the more and more you want to know, you want to be a part of that. NFL teams are watching. They're paying attention to that a lot. So yeah, he has an opportunity as well.
Indeed. And speaking of those NFL teams, as always, we look to see kind of how our Dogs are participating, especially as we go deeper into the playoffs, now that we're approaching that Super Bowl Sunday that's coming up. But NFC Championship, NFL, because it wasn't just on one side, it was on both sides there for UGA former players. There were 8 Dogs who suited up in the conference championship games this past Sunday. You had 3 former Dogs for the Niners, of course, Chris Conley, Charlie Werner, Robert Beal. None for the Lions. That might be why you're not going to the Super Bowl, but I digress. And then you have 5 former Dogs who played in the AFC Championship game. Of course, McCole Hardman, Malik Herring for the Chiefs. And then you had Ben Cleveland, Roquan Smith, and Nick Moore for the Ravens. And it just got me thinking, you guys, like, who do you feel rep the best for the Dogs with their play or not? And then we even talked a little bit about the Kirby Smart coaching tree and who showed up big or maybe not. But first off, let's talk about those dog players. Shots fired. Yeah, because you know who you are that didn't quite show up and give that good game plan. But let's talk a little bit about the Dogs players first. Who impressed you guys and who kind of made you think, not the best day for that dog?
Yeah, Roquan. It's always Roquan for me. I mean, he's just one of my favorite players.
Yeah.
He's one of my favorite players in the league. He's one of the best guys that's been in this Kirby Smart era. Arguably probably the best defensive player that he's had during that stretch of time. And you see it. I mean, he's fully taken over that Ray Lewis role from 20 years ago of rallying the troops. He's the leader. He's getting them all, ready to roll. Now, granted, that Ravens defense, they were a little shaky to start that game. And in the first half, Chiefs really brought it to them. I mean, they bowed their neck and did what they had to do in the second half. Unfortunately, the offense didn't come with it. So, but he's just such a special player and such a unique talent. So he really stuck out to me. And then the other guy, just out of all the different people that you mentioned there, I mean, much lower on the totem pole than Roquan Smith, but Charlie Warner, and to the point of like a Senior Bowl and all that stuff. This is a guy who was, more or less a backup tight end in college who came in, and now he's just got to roll like this. Like Charlie Warner's a guy that people need to look at and go, all right, if I can do this, this, and this, and I can block and maybe make a play every once in a while, this guy's on his way to having that 5 or 10 year NFL career. And not a lot of people talked about him in college or coming out of college or anything like that. And he's always brought in as an extra blocker. He is that second tight end there for the 49ers. And again, nothing special. He's just fundamentally sound in what he brings to the table. And, he's a big part of that 49ers offense, the way that they bring a run blocking scheme and what they like to do on offense.
Hey. Can I be more petty just like Tenitra?
Of course. We like petty, JD.
How about Todd Monken? Like, no call runs? Just sit back, just slinging it all over the yard. Like, does he understand that that's why you got fired from the NFL early before? Like the way the game plan, not being able to adjust to what, I know Steve Spagnuolo is one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL. He got that chief. He's maximizing every ounce of talent on the defensive side of football for the Kansas City Chiefs.
Indeed.
But man, it was just he couldn't settle his quarterback down. I mean, now, granted, that's some of that's on Lamar Jackson. Not being able to being indecisive with the football. I get it, but oh my gosh, like do something to help the man out. Do some design runs. Something. Put the ball in his hands and let him just go. Okay, I understand the old pocket passer piece. I get it. I know Lamar's trying to prove something to certain people. But at the end of the day, you gotta put the team on your back, especially when you're struggling the way they were on offense. So I think Todd Monken missed an opportunity because
me too.
There was some people talking about him being an NFL head coaching candidate. If not this cycle, definitely a serious one in the next cycle. Indeed. But now I'm questioning that.
Yeah, I said the same thing. I thought, and guys, he's coming from running back RBU. Like, how to use a running back, and
12 personnel that works in the NFL.
I was thinking too. I'm like, 12 personnel. You've got tight ends. Like, you even got one that came back.
Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely.
Right. He may not have been 100%, but he was strong enough to give you what you needed. Right. And so, it was really disappointing because it would have been nice if we could have said from the coaching tree, a good damn dog who showed up and showed out. And I'm looking like, man, sometimes it's good to know your own DNA. Like sometimes, and you have run RBU in your veins. You really should have used it for that game. But I'm like you guys, as we wrap up, just love seeing Roquan Smith being in a position to be successful. Like, I really am glad to see him that he got out of Chicago and then he got himself into a situation in Baltimore. Not to say Chicago won't end up getting there, but for now, the Ravens, we know, are going to be back in this conversation next season and for years to come. So I was really excited about him. And Charlie Warner, an absolute example of, hey, if you give them what they're asking for when they ask for it, you too could have a long career in this thing they call the NFL. So we'll talk a little bit more. Speaking of long careers, short careers, and how they kind of ebb and flow, we may have looked at it initially as only the fallout from Tuscaloosa this season. But let's just think about this. Well, we're seeing what's going on with the coaching trees in the college football space. How's that going to affect things for years to come? We'll talk about it on the other side in What's Next. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is also brought to you by Jace Medical. Now, I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, right? But can we just talk a minute still about preparing for real life? Because, life be life, and it is what it is. Now, according to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin. And I can tell you, my BFF is a pharmacist, and she'll tell you straight away that that is true. There are some scarcities when it comes to what's available this season. And she'll also tell you that it's right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. And that's pretty darn scary, except that you don't have to feel like you're helpless if you or one of your kids or family members get sick, because the supply chain issue wouldn't be an issue for you because of Jace Medical. Jace Case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, everything from respiratory infections to sinusitis, skin infections, among others. It could happen anytime, any day. I know because one of my nephews just went down last week and then the other followed. And then before I know it, my whole family's like down for the count with some type of respiratory infection. So I encourage them, as I'd encourage you, to visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It'll be reviewed by a board certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. And we know how expensive everything has gotten these days. So fraction of the regular cost should be something to incent you there as well. It's never been more important to be prepared than today and to spend wisely. Go to jacemedical.com and use offer code Locked On to get $20 off your order. That's jacemedical.com. Locked On is the offer code, and you'll get $20 off on your order. All right, guys, it was crazy because, of course, last segment, we're talking a little bit about the NFL, and that was a crazy coaching carousel situation. But we've also seen how it's kind of intertwined with and impacted by the college football coaching carousel. Jim Harbaugh, of course, the most recent, he left Michigan for the Los Angeles Chargers. And of course, we know that Nick Saban went on to greener pastures and announcing not so much that the retirement was a surprise, but kind of just when it happened. So you have a situation where you have several coaches, 3 out of those 4 head coaches in the college football playoff that have left college football in some way, shape, or form. And you kind of think to yourself, Jarvis, is this a trend that we'll see continuing until maybe NIL and player movement is regulated? And again, the thought came up, Brian, as you mentioned to us in pre-production, because you see a Jim Harbaugh going off to greener pastures. And let's just face it, there's conversation and commentary about sort of the carnage that was left behind in Ann Arbor as it relates to things like NIL and player movement. So with that thought in mind, Jarvis, how do you see kind of that lasting impact of those coaches kind of leaving the game because NIL and player movement really still is not regulated?
To be honest with you, T, I think that was just a cherry on top, because let's bring up the transfer portal. We hadn't even got used to that yet. And we not only have we not gotten used to it and just talking about it and how we cover it, and just I was even talking today, I'm talking to a scout, and just like, man, you got to remember like 7 schools before, the guy been like 7 schools. Like, oh yeah, the guy that played at Georgia, Miami, and Florida State. Like, wait a minute, what? So just from that standpoint, just talking about it, these coaches are living it. They got to recruit, not only go out and recruit and bring guys in from the high school level, they got to go out and recruit guys in the transfer portal. They got to recruit guys on their own team so they won't go jump in the portal or go to another team. And then now you add this whole money factor. Like the numbers that I've been hearing, like I was talking to a guy down there in Florida. He said they were negotiating a $13.8 million deal with this whole Jihad Rashidi. Excuse me, I'm messing up the quarterback. The quarterback that transferred, they end up going to Arizona State. Jaden Rashad, I think Jaden Rashad.
Yep, Rashad.
Please forgive me. Yeah, Jaden Rashad. So it's just when you think about those type of numbers being thrown around.
Yeah,
it's amazing. It's amazing. And to be honest with you, I had a family member who's coached college football. He said I had to get out. He said I had to get out because it's just too much. And he's around my age. He 50, 60 years old. So of course we're gonna see some of these guys. I don't think that we're gonna have it every year, but I would not be surprised if we see some of these guys who've been around college football for a long time. They start bowing out.
Yeah. And Jarvis, I just want to ask you a follow-up question, and you may not have the answer today. It may be something that we talk about next week post Senior Bowl, but I was just curious, has that conversation come up with anyone you've spoken to so far, whether it's coaches or scouts or players, just kind of the impact of those players and kind of questioning, is it a question of their decision-making if they've been at more than one school? Do you see that there's been an impact or conversation about it so far at Senior in Mobile?
I see it probably being an issue maybe 3 or 4, maybe 10 years ago, because we're used to guys like I used to, because I know when I was a scholarship athlete, I used to look at guys who transferred all the places funny. I was like, what's wrong with you? like why you jumping around school? And that was a goal of mine when I left. I was like, man, I don't want to be a guy that jumping around from school to school, because at the end of the day, something's going to happen that you're not going to like. Yeah. So it was, and in life, you got to figure it out. But nowadays, when everybody's doing it, when you get all this money thrown at you, hey, we'll give you $1 million, you come to our school, and then I don't have to sit out a year either. I mean, I'm 19, 20 years old. I'm just like, I appreciate y'all for the opportunity. I'll be posting them. Everybody always say, first of all, I want to thank
you,
coaches, what I'm saying, God. But I feel my time to come on. It's time for me to move on. Yeah, I get it. I totally get it, because I got a chance to get a meal just to go play at another school, play ball at another school. Okay. Yeah, so I think probably initially, they were like, they started looking at the player sideways, but hey, if he can play some ball, because, lesser talented guys used to transfer because they weren't playing. But now you got cats who won a Biletnikoff Award. Jordan Addison won a Biletnikoff Award and transferred to USC from Pitt.
Yeah. There were no words. Yeah, no, absolutely. Right. And then you look at a Stetson Bennett the fourth, and he leaves, comes back, is threatening to leave again. And now, hey, you got a whole job in the NFL. You might be like, that backup, lifelong backup in the league. But yeah, Brian, you look at some of that movement, and like we said, Jim Harbaugh, of course, being the most recent, officially being announced as the head coach for the Chargers. But you see that movement where he's basically like, yeah, I'm out. And not to say that he didn't always have aspirations to get back to the league, but yeah, he's out. And you look at Nick Saban basically waving the white flag, like, yeah, man, I'm done with this. And it kind of reminds you, like, this particular conversation is maybe ramping up this year, but we're going to have this conversation next year and the next year and the next year. And it won't be just the fallout from the movement of coaches next year. The fallout from these coaches moving this year is still going to be seen for years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's only going to get worse worse in the sense of movement, if you view that as a bad thing or a negative thing, because players coming up now, kids in middle school, kids in high school, this is what they see, right? This is what they see. Okay, if I'm one of the top players, I should go here and then maybe bounce here and bounce here, because that's where I'm going to maximize the amount of money for me and my family. And if they see the coaches doing it as well, I just think it's going to become an even younger man's game. And it's already become a young man's game in the coaching game. Like Jarvis just said, he has a friend that's in college coaching that's around his age. He's not old. We're not old. This isn't a spot where, but I don't think like a guy like Dabo's long for it, or, I don't think Kirby's going to be in for it as long as I thought he may have been initially, unless things change in that way. Because, and Jarvis mentioned this too, you used to just recruit players in high school, right? And occasionally someone would transfer and sit out a year. Now you got to recruit players in high school. You got to recruit players on your own team. You got to recruit players in the transfer portal, and you got to recruit players actively on other teams, even though you're not supposed to. So you're recruiting even like 3 times the amount of time that recruiting already took up all this offseason time. So there was already plenty of coaches that hated recruiting before. I mean, there's coaches that didn't make it in college because of recruiting. And now there's going to be even more that are like, all right, I can do it at this level, but I can't go up another notch and spend even more time and give up even more of my life to do it. So I think guys are going to get in, get paid, and get out quicker than ever. And maybe some of them jump to the NFL. Maybe some of them, jump into broadcasting because there's bags to get there too.
True. Well, I tell you, that's probably made some scouts and some coaches' jobs that much tougher for Senior Bowl, because like you said, Jarvis, you have to do so much more research to make sure unless he's a guy that we know for sure has been at Georgia for 3 or 4 seasons, and then ultimately even have guys, and of course I'm making light of this as we wrap up, but then you have some guys who are out there like, okay, now did he play 4, 5, or 7 years? Let me double check. Because that's a whole other piece of this puzzle too that we didn't talk about, that has also kind of complicated things. So I'm sure it's been interesting. And of course, next week we'll be on the other side of the end of the week of the Senior Bowl and the Senior Bowl game. So we'll talk more about the impact of that on the Georgia Dogs NFL prospects next week. Of course, this week, we appreciate you guys for stopping by our Atlanta football party, which of course is always your home for the best Georgia Bulldogs football talk. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, we are free and available wherever you get your download, your podcasts. And if you got a little time, which I know you do, because you always make time for us here at Locked On Sports Atlanta, come back for the Atlanta basketball party tomorrow. We'll see you then.